Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Michael Jenkins. I'm the president of the Universal Peace Federation, and I'm very happy to welcome you to our program today of the International Leadership Conference, sponsored by the Universal Peace Federation and the Washington Times Foundation. Our topic today is Korea over the coming 4 years. And we have distinguished presenters who are experts as elected officials and as also people who do work in intelligence and also work for the principles of peace. So at this time, I would like to introduce our first speaker. His name is Dr. Chung Shik Young. Dr. Young is currently the president of the Family Federation, the regional president for the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification of North America. For many years, he was the chairman of UPF for all of Asia, and as well as the president of the Family Federation at the same time. His work in Asia was outstanding, and we want to welcome him as he's just come to the United States with a new appointment, and he is doing a wonderful work to bring everybody together. He's the one, Congressman Burton and our other panelists here, that was able to win many of the presidents of Asia, from India to the Philippines and many democracies, as well as many of the presidents of and prime ministers of communist nations could also see engagement with UPF, and dialogue would bring everyone closer to peace. It's quite an accomplishment. Because of that great work, he was asked to come and really help guide this North American effort too. So at this time, I'd like to ask everyone to welcome Dr. Chung Shik Young.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. And for the International Leadership Conference, I thank the Universal Peace Federation and the Washington Times Foundation for putting together this virtual venue for us to discuss these important topics. I just came from Asia, where I served as the regional chairman of UPF for 12 years. Through the vision and work of the founder, Mother Moon, we were able to create a very strong foundation with the ILC content in Asia. These principles are truly universal. The values taught by UPF and through the ILC and other initiatives allow us to work with everyone and continue to spread this message of peace. We were able to bring together heads of state from communist countries such as Cambodia and Nepal. At the same time, we can work with all levels of government in more democratic nations such as India and the Philippines. The goal is always the same: find ways to establish positive relationships without compromising our principles and security, and promote endeavors for the benefit of the peoples and nations of the world. But another important point is supporting and peaceful reunification of North and South Korea. This requires real dialogue and building of trust. Through the foundation of UPF in these Asian nations, our delegation was able to enter North Korea and foster greater dialogue with them. From Asia and from around the world, we can see that America's role is central. America is able to contribute greatly to the relationship between the two Koreas and remains a most critical player in this field. I hope through the effort of UPF through IAPP, we can find and suggest avenues to advance this goal. I look forward to hearing today's discussions and to working together with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Young. Very much appreciate your reflection. And we thank you also for your leadership in Asia, because under the banner of UPF, together with Dr. Walsh, Dr. Young was able to put delegations together from member countries of UPF that were from the communist background and had diplomatic relations with Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il and so forth. And it's a very unique aspect of UPF that we have Western nations such as the United States and free democracies that are members of UPF, about 150 nations total. But also when we combine together with our delegations from Asia that have diplomatic relations with North Korea, our communications actually can be brought to North Korea in a very unique way, a unique delegation that also supports our founder, Dr. Hak Chan Moon, and understands the principles of peace that UPF is bringing forward. So Dr. Young, thank you so much for being with us, and we welcome you to your new role in America. And Congressman Burton, I would like you to personally take care of Dr. Young as our international co-chairman of IAPP. He'll play a key role with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Thomas Walsh. Dr. Thomas Walsh is the chairman of the Universal Peace Federation International. He was there at the founding of UPF in 2005 in New York. He's overseen the development of UPF until now. It's become a major influence for peace in the world. It's an NGO, non-governmental organization with general consultative status at the United Nations. So under Dr. Walsh's leadership, we gained that kind of rapport with the United Nations, and it opens up our relations with many countries. Also, last year, Dr. Walsh was able to have an audience with His Holiness Pope Francis, and he's doing that kind of work. He was just in Sudan just a few weeks ago when the peace accords were signed, and he was there also as a speaker in South Sudan when the peace accords were made. And we're very honored to present to you the chairman of UPF International, Dr. Thomas Walsh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jenkins. I'm excited to see this program as it's developed thanks to the Washington Times Foundation and your leadership, Dr. Jenkins, and Congressman Burton, Congressman Doolittle for shepherding forward not only UPF, but the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace. Just a brief word in addition, this is the 70th anniversary year of the start of the Korean War in 1950. We're at 75 years of the United Nations establishment, the charter signed in San Francisco in 1945. And one of the first kind of peacekeeping missions was the formation of the UN Command Force, a 16-nation peace force that was led by the United States to preserve democracy in the Republic of Korea. So it's timely. UPF is encouraging all of our chapters globally to give attention to this anniversary occasion. The armistice, as you all know, was signed, but no peace treaty yet signed. It remains a critical flashpoint in the world, and I'm grateful that these discussions are going to take place. This weekend, in fact, we're going to have an international program that will address issues of how we can move forward toward peaceful reunification of Korea. And in addition, we'll have a special ceremony and concert to honor Korean War veterans. We've been interviewing veterans in Ethiopia and Colombia and the Philippines and Thailand and Belgium and France and Italy, the 16 nations and those that are still with us, thank God. So thank you for convening today. Dr. Jenkins, I turn it back over to you. I welcome Dr. Young. I'm so happy to see Congressman Yoho and Congressman Salmon and Representative of the Washington Times, Mr. Guy Taylor. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Walsh. We appreciate so much your leadership for UPF International, and we appreciate your taking time here. Dr. Walsh is traveling the whole world, everywhere he goes. It's like developing so rapidly. But right now, This Rally of Hope that he mentioned is coming this Saturday. It's going to be a great program to honor the 16 nations that supported the freedom of South Korea. At this time, I would like to also bring forward the Honorable John Doolittle. Congressman Doolittle is now the chairman of the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace in North America. He also served as the House Republican Conference secretary and was deputy whip and was a member of the Committee on Appropriations. And he was the co-founder of the famous Republican Study Committee, which had a great impact on our Congress. He served in the US Congress from 1991 to 2009. We are honored to have him as our chairman of North America, serving together with Congressman Burton, the international chairman. Please welcome with me at this time, the Honorable John Doolittle.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Jenkins, and fellow co-panelists, and ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you. These are certainly exciting times, to say the least. And as we prepare to wrap up this year and move into the new year, hopefully by then we'll know who the president, next president of the United States actually will be. In the meantime, I think it's important to realize some of the fundamental principles that we cherish that should guide us going forward in dealing with North Korea and China and the other nations of the world, particularly with North Korea. I mean, President Trump broke new ground in unprecedented ways. And I think we need to build upon that, whatever happens in the future. I was a little concerned to read from Mr. Biden a statement that he wanted to return to the if you will, the getting the other countries involved. You know, I thought back when he said that to the six-party talks, kind of the traditional way of doing things. The traditional way of doing things has never yielded any meaningful result in addressing the problem of North Korea. And I really think it would be a mistake to turn back in that direction. At least with President Trump's diplomacy, there's a personal relationship established with the leader of North Korea, and they seem to have a really good one. That has, and where there haven't been missiles fired since that time. They haven't denuclearized, and that's the real issue. And that's got to continue to be pursued. And China, we've got a Maoist who's the leader of China these days. They have their own internal issues that are somewhat opaque to the rest of the world, but we have some idea, I think. And they may, conditions are not particularly rosy in China and are not likely to be for the next few years. So nevertheless, they've kind of propped up North Korea, and it's a complex relationship. I think really the greatest thing we have going for us vis-a-vis China and North Korea is the tripartite alliance between South Korea and Japan and the United States. And anything that we can do as the United States to reduce the tensions that are currently there between Japan and South Korea would be a real positive development. We can't afford weakness in this tripartite alliance. We've got to have a unity amongst ourselves, because I think we get a real important point of leverage if those three countries remain unified and focused on addressing this problem. We also have to recognize that I think in the world we're becoming increasingly unstable in terms of the relationships of the past in the post-World War II order that was established. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but anyway, the relationships are shifting. I think it's inherently more unstable. The coronavirus plague has affected all the nations of the world to one degree or another, and certainly in ours, in the developed countries, very, very significant and probably going to become more so in the less developed countries. In the meantime, we've got to find a way forward to promote peace and freedom. And one principle I think that we really need to keep in mind is the principle of peace through strength, not make unwarranted concessions. I wouldn't make any concessions to North Korea unless they've made a demonstrated offering of concessions on their own that are meaningful and verifiable. I worry a little bit that if should Mr. Biden become the next president, that those concessions might start up again. And I thought that was disastrous. We've had decades of concessions. They've played the United States very well, and we have next to nothing to show for it under the old approach. And we've always known as a country since George Washington that peace is best achieved through strength and building up the American military and the military of our allies, and being unified in our purpose to make sure that freedom can prevail and to resist authoritarianism wherever we may see it. I thank you for this opportunity to share those thoughts and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Congressman Doolittle. And we really want to thank you also for your leadership as chairman of UPF for North America, but also you helped with Congressman Burton in leading fact-finding delegations to Korea, to Japan, and other nations with the Washington Times. And it was a tremendous effort. And several times we were able to go to the NIS, which is the counterpart to the CIA in Korea. We met the directors there, on the two directors. And we had also in-depth discussions with the chairs of foreign relations, people at the Blue House, all people involved, the foreign minister and others. And then we could also have joint sessions back here with Korean and Japanese and American congressmen in the Foreign Affairs Committee room. So I'm very grateful for your leadership, and we're honored to have you with us. Now I'd like to present the Honorable Matt Salmon. Matt has served 10 years in Congress at two different terms of 1995 to 2001 and 2013 to 17. And he could have stayed there as long as he wanted, but he felt called to do other things for peace and for freedom for America. He is the only congressman or member of Congress is fluent in Mandarin, led many delegations of the International Relations Committee to Korea and China. Also, he did a lot with the Washington Times and the fact-finding trips too. He is currently the Vice President of Government Relations for Arizona State University, and he was the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Asia and the Pacific. Welcome, Congressman Matt Salmon. Honored to see you. Can unmute.
There we go. You can hear me a little better now?
Yep.
All right, thanks, Michael. First and foremost, thank you to UPF for your constant leadership in the world in the sometimes very elusive cause of global peace, but especially peace in the Korean Peninsula, which you've been working on for many, many years. I may have just a little bit of a different take. I personally believe that, like many students of Asia do, that really the key to dealing with Korea, the 800-pound gorilla, so to speak, in dealing with North Korea has always been China. And while our relations with China over the last several years has deteriorated quite rapidly, I still think that we need to double down on some of our diplomatic activities. I truly do believe that there was some great progress actually in the meetings between our two leaders, the President of the United States and Kim Jong-un. They didn't yield the results that we wanted, but in comparison to what's happened in the last several decades, I think that there was some modicum of success. Ultimately, we want to see a denuclearized North Korea, and I still believe it's possible. I think one of the mistakes that was made was not pursuing the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. And some of you may be scratching your head, say, wait a minute, that was just a trade agreement. Let me tell you something. The countries of the Asia Pacific that were partners in the TPP initiative, the TPP agreement, viewed that as far more than just a trade agreement. It was a commitment to solidarity, and I think that it ultimately would have led to a lot more than just a trade agreement as far as cooperation between those countries like Japan, like Vietnam, others in the region that really could have contained China. China has been blowing and going in that region, in the South and the East China Seas, building up military installations, taking control of islands that don't belong to them, trying to bully their way through international waters and flouting international standards and rules. And I truly do believe that in the next year, our administration and our diplomatic corps really need to redouble those efforts and go back to talking to those nations about TPP. We lost a lot of credibility with those countries when we just shut down dialogue. And my party, the Republican Party, has always been the party of free trade. And I think we need to get back to that. I truly do believe that, some of the people, the countries that truly love us and respect us, like Japan and Vietnam and others, were very, very disappointed. And it was a element of trust that was lost when that agreement was not pursued. So I'll get off of that. I think that pursuing those kinds of things would really solidify our strength in the region and our ability to cooperate, not just in trade, but militarily and strategically in virtually every area. And I hope that we take a second look at that. The other thing is we've got to really double down on our pressure on China. I don't mean pressure try to embarrass them publicly, but diplomatic conversations that need to erupt again in a strong way with the Chinese about the North Korean issue. They have as much of a vested interest as we do in Korea not developing nuclear weapons and that are deployable with intercontinental ballistic missiles. They have if they were to deploy missiles against Japan or the United States or Australia or any of our allies over in the region, it'd be very destabilizing for the global economy, and they know it, and they would be one of the biggest ones hurt. So I think they have interest and a desire, but there are other things that worry about. They worry about a unified Korea and what would the United States presence be militarily there on the peninsula, and on and on and on. Those are things that we can work through. And I think that we need to continue our strong diplomatic efforts with China. I hope that if there is a change of hands in the administration in January, and right now it's looking likely that it will, I hope that they continue to pursue strong diplomatic relations with North Korea and not putting him in the pariah, Kim Jong-un in the pariah list, and not worthy of meeting with any of our top people. I'm not sure that strategy's worked. I think, he's a young man with a very strong ego and very much wants to assert his role on the global stage. And I think that we need to be cognizant of the fact that negotiations and dialogue. You tell me any relationship in your life where negotiations and dialogue haven't made a difference, whether it's your wife or your business partner or somebody from the opposite party when you're working in Congress. Tell me truthfully when that's not a good idea to actually communicate with somebody and try to figure out what is most important to them and what buttons you can push to move them to do the right thing. I always think that's a good thing. But I also, in summation, I'd like to say that I hope that the diplomatic corps realizes that if that's all we use, they're probably not going to be successful. I've been associated with UPF, USA International, for well over 25 years now. And I've never seen a more influential organization that's actually able to get things done. And I think that the United States government would be very, very wise to tap some of the leaders in UPF to take a front seat when it comes to negotiating a peaceful reunification, or excuse me, a peaceful peaceful Korean Peninsula unification. So anyway, I'm hoping that'll happen. We've got a lot of work to do. As my colleague Congressman Doolittle said, the United States, Japan, and Korea are very, very key to this this solution. And Korea and Japan have been at odds over things that go back clear back to World War II. And I'm not diminishing them in any way. The comfort woman issue was a very, very important thing to resolve, but it hasn't been completely resolved yet to either party's satisfaction, and they continue to kind of snipe at each other, and they are not working together in the most cooperative of ways in order to get things done. And we've got to use all of our diplomatic powers to repair those relationships and let them know that there are other things far more important than old grudges and moving forward. So anyway, I really value the relationship that I've had with UPF. I think that if anybody can attain the elusive goal of world peace, they can. And I'm proud of UPF and proud to be associated with them. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Salmon. Great insights and experience you have with negotiating and dialogue. And we need your leadership for UPF International. We want to introduce at this time the Honorable Ted Yoho. Congressman Yoho is a doctor of veterinary medicine. He was first elected to Congress in 2012. He served with distinction, and he is currently the chairman of the Subcommittee of Foreign Affairs on Asia, the Pacific, and Non-Proliferation. So we're very happy. Ted and Carolyn, his wife, came to Japan with us last year with Congressman Andy Biggs and his wife Cindy, as well as Speaker Gingrich and also Congressman Salmon and his wife. We had a tremendous experience together, also in dialogue with Japanese congressmen. And what that did was it helped to build the bridge between America and Japan, which is so important. And also America is trying to help always to bridge the gap between Japan and Korea. And as Congressman Salmon brought up, it's a very sensitive historical issue of a lot of pain from World War II. And we are very careful to bring that also into some kind of a effort to understand one another. And I think Congressman Yoho's efforts in Japan did a lot to bring understanding and encourage our allies, Japan and Korea, to stay together with America, because to balance out the situation in Northeast Asia, those three nations play a most critical role, as do all the other allies of America in dealing with China and North Korea and Russia. So at this time, I'd like to welcome the Honorable Ted Yoho, Congressman from Florida. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. I appreciate it, and I appreciate UPF. That was an incredible trip we took over there, and I'd like to thank the Washington Times too. I've heard the speakers, and I agree with them all, and I'm just fortunate to have the opportunity to join you all here today, and it's a pleasure to speak alongside my colleagues. I think the theme of what we're talking about here is peace in the region. As we know, the world's going through a tectonic shift in world powers we haven't seen since World War II. We've been absent of another world war, and let's hope we stay that way. But we also see rising nations that are challenging the status quo, i.e. China, with the aggression, with the intimidation, and with the coercion they're doing in the South China Sea, militarizing those land masses that they've dredged up, going against international norms and challenging those things in a way we haven't seen. It reminds me of Hitler going into other countries and taking them over. When you look at the world stage today, there's two countries I think about: Russia invading other nations, taking land masses, and we see China wanting to do the same thing. And I think, as it was pointed out, the Maoist leader of China now, Xi Jinping, stated very succinctly in the 19th Chinese Communist Party in 2017 that the era of China has arrived. No longer will we be made to swallow our interests around the world. it's time for China to take the world stage. Now, I bring that up because as you brought out, Matt, about North Korea and South Korea, the unification, there's several obstacles that have to be overcome. And, you know, I look at obstacles and challenges as opportunity for greatness in the future. And those are denuclearization. That has to be defined to where Kim Jong-un accepts it and the other members accept it. And China plays a very large role in that, knowing that they provide about 90% of the trade with North Korea. We've had the Chinese ministers here in our office talking about the pressure that they could help, since they did vote and they're part of the UN Permanent Security Council. And we voted unanimously with all 15 members to put the sanctions on North Korea, but yet China and Russia are probably the biggest abusers of not enforcing those. And our goal is, again, peaceful unification on the Korean Peninsula. And as Dr. Walsh brought up, it goes back to the mantra of this nation: peace through strength is probably the best thing to do. And when I look at ROK, Japan, and the United States, that's probably our largest and strongest alliance outside of NATO. And if we show fissures in that, whether it's between us and South Korea with the SMA, or if it's with us and Japan over trade deals, or South Korea and Japan, it weakens that, and it empowers North Korea, it empowers China, and maybe some influence from Russia. So it's so strategically important that we help mend that bridge and get them to look up beyond the hurt from World War II and before that. And we've talked a lot about this. You know, at one point there has to be an apology, and we've seen Japan do that. But on the other hand, there has to be acceptance and forgiveness. And what we need to do, and that's not to deminimize the differences between those two nations, but that is to give it a pause so that we look further down the road at what the really big threat is. And if we show weakness there, it's going to weaken that whole thing. And I think you'll see an empowered China, because China, I think, is afraid of the unification between South and North Korea. And Matt, I disagree with you on TPP when I first came into Congress, but my thinking has changed. I think that was a missed opportunity, in lieu that China and the 15 nations just signed RCEP, which is a regional economic partnership, comprehensive economic partnership, which includes 2.2 billion people, which is about 30% of the world's population, and we're not in that deal. This is, I think, a missed opportunity by our nation, that we could come together to show that unification and to continue what we've always stood for in this country, and that is freedom and liberty, and a constitutional republic that we have, run by a democratic process that the Western worlds have taken, and that's where the pieces come out of. And I think if we promote that and work to get back into these trade deals, as you brought up, I think that's something that, I don't want to say strengthen our hand, but I think it will project stronger peace throughout the Indo-Pacific region and the rest of the world. So I look forward to this dialogue and the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Yoho. Excellent, excellent insights. And we're looking forward to your leadership on the international scale, also with our trips to Korea, Japan, and Northeast Asia. We're very happy about the work that's been going on with dialogue in Northeast Asia. And over the years, the founders of UPF, Reverend Sum Young Moon and Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, always were engaging all leaders of all nations. And both of them grew up in North Korea. And the memoir of Dr. Moon is now out on Amazon. I would recommend you pick up a copy. It's called The Mother of Peace, and details her escape from North Korea and her experience of coming out of that kind of war-torn situation during the war, and also having a lifelong pursuit together with her husband to bring her homeland back together, the peaceful reunification of Korea. So they cannot thank America enough, because without America and those other 15 nations, Korea would have all been taken over by the communist forces of China, Russia, and North Korea. and it's a tremendous sacrifice. Congressman Dan Burton actually gave his endorsement of this book. He said, Mother Moon is bringing God's message to the world and works to help marriages and families survive during these troubled times, bringing all nations and religions together to achieve world peace. So thank you, Congressman Burton, and to your wife for endorsing that memoir. And I'd like to introduce at this time my dear friend and colleague and the leader of the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace, Honorable Dan Burton. Dan has served in Congress from 1981 to 2013. He's an outstanding leader. He was either chairman or the ranking member on the committees on Asia and the Pacific, Middle East, Europe and Eurasia, Africa and the Western Hemisphere, as well as a very famous chairman of government reform. He really helped correct the direction of our government in many areas. The great patriot, he and his wife, Dr. Samia Burton, have been great in helping us bring together people from all over the world. I'd like you to welcome at this time the Honorable Congressman Dan Burton. You're muted there. You have to unmute, Congressman. Tap your microphone button, your red.
Sorry. Okay, is that better now?
Very good.
Okay, I think Matt Salmon and I must have something in common. Anyhow, let me start off by saying I agree with everything you said about Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, Mother Moon. What she, along with Dr. Walsh and you, Dr. Jenkins and others, have done to promote world peace and understanding around the world is extremely important, and we ought to all congratulate her on a daily basis for what she's trying to do. She's been going all over the world having conferences and organizational meetings with people to try to promote peace and families and understanding, and I really appreciate that, and I think we all do. Let me start off by saying some things about what the previous speakers have been talking about. Congressman Yoho talked about what's going on in the South China Sea, with China trying to usurp the authority of other countries and nations in that particular area. And one of the things that I think is extremely important is what President Reagan and other presidents have done, and saying that we have to make sure we have peace, but we have peace through strength, and that we use our strength to make sure that there is peace and freedom around the world, and countries like China don't usurp those pieces and freedoms that we enjoy by taking over very important parts of the world. The South China Sea, as Congressman Yoho was talking about, it's extremely important, and it's one of the major commerce and travel lanes in the world. And if China controls that with impunity, then it puts other countries at risk in everything they do in the area. And President Trump, President Reagan, and others in the past have made sure that China understood that if they tried to close or control the South China Sea, that we would send in the Fifth Fleet and other parts of our military to make sure that those sea lanes were open and free to the people around the world. That's extremely important, and I compliment Congressman Yoho for bringing that up. One of the things that Ronald Reagan talked about was making absolutely sure that there was peace through strength. And under President Trump, we've also seen that same policy being moved forward. President Trump has expanded the support for the military. Our military is now stronger than it's ever been. And while we're trying to negotiate with China and try to work with South Korea and North Korea for reunification of the peninsula, we have to make sure that we have the strength to make sure that we can back up the things that we're trying to accomplish by letting the world know that we want peace, we want freedom, but we also want to make sure that those who would take away those freedoms know that they're not going to be able to do that, because the United States and our allies are going to be strong enough to prevent that from ever happening. One of the things that concerned me about North Korea and Kim Jong-il, now Kim Jong-un, and other leaders of North Korea, is that they made agreements with South Korea and with the United States and other people in the world, and they have violated those agreements. And one of the things that President Reagan said when he was in the White House and when he was negotiating with Russia and other countries, he said, we have to have peace, but we have to verify the agreements that we make with them. And we have to make sure that they live up to those agreements. And one of the things that we have not done in the past is we have not held North Korea's feet to the fire when they make an agreement. They've made agreements with President Clinton and others that have been violated, and they've gotten away with that with pretty much impunity. And when agreements take place now involving Japan, South Korea, North Korea, the United States, and others, we have to make sure that they live up to those agreements, that they do not deviate from what's agreed to. And that's one of the things that's been a big concern of mine in the past and will be a concern of mine and others in the future. Sure, we want to see South Korea and North Korea negotiate a peaceful solution to the peninsula. And we want the United States and Japan and others to participate in that decision-making process. But while we're doing that, we have to make absolutely sure that when an agreement is signed and agreed to, that everybody, every party involved lives up to that agreement. And in the past, we've had a problem with North Korea not doing that, and we must make sure that that does not happen again. Discussions in the six-party talks and the other things that have taken place in the past have worked toward a solution to these problems, but they have not been successful. And one of the reasons I think that President Trump has been able to move move everything in the right direction is because he has stood strong with South Korea, and he has been strong when he negotiated with North Korea and made sure when he talked with Kim Jong-un that we wanted to work with him, that we wanted peace, and we wanted to make sure that there was a reunification of the Korean Peninsula. But in the process, I think President Trump has made clear that we want to make sure that everything is done in accordance with the agreements that we're making, and that Kim Jong-un will live up to those agreements. And that's one of the big concerns I've had, because I was in Congress for 30 years and I've seen agreement after agreement after agreement violated when presidents of the United States and leaders of North Korea made agreements, and those agreements were not lived up to by North Korea. So while we're negotiating, and we want to negotiate in good faith, we want to make sure that all the parties involved, including North Korea, live up to their agreements. One of the things that I'm very happy of is that Dr. Walsh and Mother Moon and Dr. Jenkins and others have worked very hard to create what we have now called the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace. As you heard before from my good friend, Congressman Doolittle, who's the chairman of IAPP of North America, that we are working very hard to expand the influence of parliamentarians around the world in the cause and quest for peace. IAPP was formed to try to head off international problems, whether it's a pandemic where we have an international virus that's causing a pandemic, or whether it's the prospects of another war. IAPP has been formed to try to find a way for peace and understanding without the prospects of a military conflict or a misunderstanding among nations. Right now, I think we have several thousand, 4,000 or 5,000 members of parliaments from around the world that are working together in the cause of peace. And we have, I think, well over 100 nations that are working in this direction. And that's another reason why I compliment Mother Moon and Dr. Walsh and Mike Jenkins and others in working so hard to make sure that we continue to head in the direction of peace by involving people around the world in this quest. And it is a great quest. When you're talking about North Korea, South Korea, China, Japan, Korea, or Taiwan, and all the nations in that region, the possibility of a conflict erupting in a very short period of time is very real. It's very real. And it's extremely important that the leaders of these nations know that other nations around the world are watching with great interest on what they're doing, and that they want to make sure that peace is preserved in the region and that we do not see another war erupt. And that's why parliamentarians around the world are watching what's going on under the auspices of the IAPP to make sure if we see the possibility of a conflict or another pandemic, that we work together to head that off by making sure all the parties that are involved are informed and aware that we're going to be doing everything we can to keep that kind of a problem from erupting. And that's what IAPP is all about, to make sure that we're all working together in the cause of peace. And where we see a misunderstanding or the possibility of a conflict because of that misunderstanding, that we're all going to work together, try to use whatever influence we have to convince those who may be a party to a conflict to stop it, to sit down and talk about it, to try to negotiate and work things out so that we can solve our problems without another international conflict. And that's one of the big concerns we've all had about the Korean Peninsula. We had a war there. It's under an armistice now. It's not completely over, but we've been working for years and years and years to get the parties together to say, okay, we're going to solve our problems in a peaceful way and not going to have another conflict. And toward that end, as my colleagues have been talking about a few minutes ago, we want to see a denuclearization of the entire peninsula. North Korea has nuclear weapons. They have been expanding in the past their nuclear capability. And in order to have peace and reunification of the peninsula, we have to denuclearize the entire area. And that's another thing that IAPP and UPF and others have been working for, to try to make sure that working together, this conglomeration of nations is working in concert to make sure that the denuclearization process takes place. And as that takes place, the reunification process can take place and move in the right direction and get the parties together to agree. And toward that end, the United States, Japan, South Korea, all of us in the region, or all of us in the world are working to make sure that those things are accomplished. And it's a job that's not going to be over in a day, a week, or a month. And with the election that we just saw take place here in the United States, and not yet knowing who our president's going to be, we need to do everything we can to make sure that whoever our president is, President Trump or President Biden, that we work together in the cause of peace and make sure that we continue to work in a direction that's going to show peace through strength. And that's one of the things I would say to the new administration, if it is the Biden administration. Be strong. Be willing to negotiate. Be willing to work with all the parties, but do it through peace, through strength. Make sure our military and our allies are strong enough to enforce any kind of an agreement and make sure that the parties involved do not violate those agreements. President Trump has had that as one of his keystones, and I hope and pray that President Biden will as well, should he be the eventual winner. And with that, I'd like to say I really enjoy working with all my colleagues. I've sat here and listened to your comments, my former colleagues and the leaders we're talking to today, and I'm very impressed. I think the world's on the right track as long as we have people like you working together in the cause of peace. Thank you very much.
Congressman Burton, you honored us with your remarks and your leadership. Thank you very, very much. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Guy Taylor. He is the National Security Team Leader for the Washington Times. He's an award-winning correspondent who oversees the Washington Times State Department, Pentagon, and intelligence community coverage. He has been with us to Japan and Korea, covering some of the work for the Washington Times Fact Finders. He also won the prestigious Virginia Press Association Award for his series on political, economic, and security developments in Mexico. We welcome at this time Mr. Guy Taylor of the Washington Times. Need to unmute. There you go.
Now you can hear. Hi, I'm very flattered to have been given the opportunity to participate. It's a serious honor to have the chance to offer remarks alongside Dr. Walsh, Dr. Young, Dr. Jenkins, Congressman Doolittle, Matt Salmon, Ted Yoho, Dan Burton, some heavy hitters here. I don't know how I got made to go after Congressman Burton. It's a hard act to follow, but I'll try. I can't stress enough how valuable these discussions are. So thank you. I'm coming at this from perhaps a different perspective. I'm the guy that churns out tens of thousands of words of newspaper copy following the day-to-day and month-to-month of the geopolitical evolutions and talking with literally hundreds of people involved on all sides, whether it's Steve Biegun, Mike Pompeo, Moon Jae-in's advisors, or high-level North Korean defectors, all to try and present informed and factual articles that stir smart, meaningful debate. So I'll try to be as succinct as possible and offer a few more thoughts that hopefully can help steer the conversation. I want to point out that the current stall in denuclearization talks with North Korea has now lasted more than 20 months. That's a long time, considering that the contemporary wave of diplomacy was first set in motion with the overtures both sides engaged in during the February 2018 Winter Olympics in Seoul, and that the actual talks, including the June 2018 Singapore summit, the February 2019 Hanoi summit, the June 2019 handshake meeting in the DMZ, and essentially all working level activities that surrounded those events all occurred during a period of just 16 months. In other words, the current period of stall has now gone on for longer than the talks themselves did. And as this stall has dragged on, we've all had ample time to digest the basic reality that Kim Jong-un's North Korea has continued to clandestinely advance its nuclear weapons capacity, as well as the capacity to field long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of carrying compact nuclear warheads in blatant violation of decades of past agreements and UN Security Council resolutions. So it's there. That's where we are right now, that presumably an incoming Biden administration must decide how it intends to proceed. And I just want to highlight a couple of possible, maybe obvious, but possible paths forward to kind of frame where we are right now. Especially as this administration is going to try to have to, the same way that President Trump did 4 years ago, trying to have to avoid a major escalation in the face of much anticipated North Korean provocations during the coming months, probably, of uncertainty. The first move for a presumable Biden administration will be to act very quickly towards appointing a new U.S. special representative for North Korea. That was a position held by Steve Biegun, but for the last year, it's really been empty. The Trump administration says, oh, well, Biegun's still doing it, but anybody who gets close and talks with Steve now understands that he's got a really full plate and he's not working on this every day. So that job needs to be filled quickly. And to name a team of officials and advisors who are going to work with that representative, picking the right team. And this should be debated by people like everybody on this call. Who should be on this team? It's going to send a clear signal to Pyongyang of the new administration's focus and potential intentions. The focus and intentions could quickly come to bear through the issuance of a firm and clear statement that Washington in a Biden era will only elevate sanctions pressure and may even respond militarily if Kim conducts a nuclear detonation test or test launches one of the new road mobile ICBMs that it rolled out. The regime rolled out at the recent Workers' Party 75th anniversary parade about a month ago. After making the clear statement, the new administration could send a positive signal by echoing the sentiment that President Trump conveyed in a private letter to Kim Jong-un in March, that the U.S. is willing and eager to help North Korea expand its medical capabilities to battle the coronavirus and potential future pandemics. Regardless of what might come of such an overture, it will present an opportunity for a potentially positive rather than hostile communication from the North Koreans to the new leadership in Washington. Little steps like that matter. The second thing, or the next thing, and this is maybe controversial and debatable, but a new administration could do some soul searching to recognize that Beijing's calculus toward North Korea and the Kim regime has shifted and evolved over the past few years. In other words, US officials might signal their newfound understanding that Chinese officials do not control Kim Jong-un like a puppet on a string, and that China may truly be more aligned with Washington than not toward the goal of ridding North Korea of its nuclear weapons, if only because such a development might result in a reduction of the US military footprint in Northeast Asia, something China wants very much to see happen. Now, I'm not saying turn soft on China or pander to Beijing. In fact, I agree with most of what Congressman Yoho and Dan Burton have said about taking a peace through strength posture in the big picture towards China. But I am saying we've got to keep an open mind about finding ways to redefine China's role in getting North Korea to denuclearize. And we really need to sharpen and tighten the communication with China so that it's not all on a hostile footing. The point is that rather than leave the Chinese on the sidelines going forward, we got to consider maybe sending this new special representative to North Korea on a public visit to China first. I think we'd all do well to consider what such a move might signal to Pyongyang, how Pyongyang might respond, what would the optics of that be. In conclusion, I think that maybe even more importantly, the new administration could move swiftly to mop up some stains currently marring the US-ROK alliance, signaling to Pyongyang that the first 2 years of a Biden White House, which overlap with the final 2 years of a Moon Jae-in Blue House, will be a period of lockstep strategic focus between Seoul and Washington that has, frankly, I'm going to be the one that says it has frankly been lacking during the last 20 months. And I say it with utmost respect to Harry Harris, a great military man and ambassador. And I say it with respect to the Trump administration, but in essence, the new administration has got to signal that the US-ROK negotiations on things like defense cost sharing will no longer be a matter of public spectacle that can be exploited by China, exploited by Pyongyang, and it won't be a matter of speculation of whether or not America might suddenly move its troops off the peninsula at the whim of a president just deciding that we have to bring everybody home for tactical reasons without thinking of the 100-year marathon, to reference Michael Pillsbury's book, and the strategic need to keep American forces in the region in order to really get toward the achievement of complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization by North Korea. That's it from where I sit right now. Hopefully that stirred it up a little bit and offered just the perspective of a daily journalist kind of covering this stuff closely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Guy. At this time, I'd like to ask all of our panelists to turn their video back on, and we're going to have a gallery mode, and unmute your mics. We do have a couple of questions from the audience that we'd like to present at this time. Congressman Yoho and Congressman Salmon, if you could also join us, and Congressman Doolittle, come right back on. And thank you. This question is for Congressman Burton. From Tom McDivitt, chairman of the Washington Times. What are the prospects for IAPP to work together with the United Nations to form a global grand strategy over the next couple of years to influence Northeast Asia and that environment to come towards peace? Congressman Burton?
Yeah, I'd like to thank my friend, Mr. McDivitt, for that question. And it's a very good one. The reason I think that, and I think we should work together in every way possible with the United Nations. I'm talking about IAPP. The difference is the United Nations has leaders that are appointed by their governments. For instance, we have an ambassador to the United Nations from the United States. And so they represent pretty much the views of the administration or the executive branch. IAPP, on the other hand, is represented by people who are elected by their constituents in a given area, in a given country. And as a result, IAPP, I think, can espouse the views of the people that are represented by these representatives. Congressmen are represent their constituents when they discuss foreign policy. And we don't necessarily always agree with the positions of the administration or our representatives at the United Nations. And while the United Nations and IAPP should work together wherever possible, I think it's important that we realize one represents governments that are appointed by the leaders of that government, and the other is represented by the people who are elected by their constituents. And so we get a real good view of not just the leaders of a country, but also the people who are represented by their elected representatives.
Guy Taylor, a question for you. What did you think of the 75th anniversary of the military parade and the Korea Workers' Party showcasing the massive ICBM?
Yeah, I think that I was pleasantly surprised and relieved that there wasn't a submarine launched intercontinental ballistic missile test and that there wasn't any kind of a nuclear test. I thought that the provocation of rolling out a bigger ICBM at the parade, it was a provocation, but it was really calculated by the Kim regime. It wasn't something that was like, we're going to take a risk. It was much more like, we know this is a risk. We know it doesn't cross Trump's red line, but we're going to do it just to kind of, flip off the world and say, hey, we're still developing these weapons. So it's disturbing at the same time. And I actually, in the aftermath of it, so I gained these views by talking to the people who ran the CIA desk on Korea, talking to South Koreans. And I think there's a frustration, particularly among hardliners in Washington, folks who want to see a more aggressive US policy. There's a frustration that we didn't really respond to the provocation. Didn't really hear much about it from the White House. Trump focused on the election. Didn't hear much about it from Pompeo. Didn't hear much about it from Biegun. And that sets a precedent, and that follows a lack of response from Washington over the last year and a half to something like, I think it's 24 short-range missile tests by the North Koreans that didn't necessarily violate Trump's red lines from the Singapore summit, but were carried out and really made people in the region, particularly the South Koreans and the Japanese, very nervous. So those are a few thoughts on it, and thanks for the question.
Very good. This question for Dr. Walsh. Your thoughts on the idea of IAPP working with the UN to help impact Northeast Asia?
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins, and thank you for that question. I agree with much of what Congressman Burton said. I would just add that I think it's good if we set up an appointment to meet with counterparts with the Interparliamentary Union, which has an observer status at the UN and has been around, for 120 years or more, and just to learn the lay of the land there with that entity. And the other thing is, I think it's good if we strategically, just as we do in Washington, but also at the UN, we can set up appointments with the missions of relevant nations, either that, as you said, Dr. Jenkins, have diplomatic relations with North Korea, for example, a nation like Nepal, where UPF has very good relations, or Cambodia or others, as well as a meeting at the US mission. And just to, in a way, our role as civil society vis-a-vis the UN or a member state is we're there to support or partner with them. The civil society role is very much a junior partner, but its role is greatly respected increasingly over recent years, knowing that it is not simply state actors that make things happen in the world, but the role of non-state actors. NGOs are also unelected officials who have opinions about things. UPF, however, is you know, almost like what Congressman Salmon said, that dialogue, give it a try. You know, it's always potential for opening doors and starting to build a bridge and some trust and confidence. Those are a few thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Walsh. Congressman Yoho, what do you think about the idea that some observers say that the nuclear armament, nuclear power is part of North Korea's strategy? It's part of their DNA. They're never going to give it up. It's the bottom line for Kim Jong-un that North Korea will never denuclearize. What are your thoughts on that? Also, Congressman Doolittle, if you could reply on that.
I think that's very accurate. I think Kim Jong-un's legitimacy comes from his power. And, you know, it's the mantra that we talk about, strength, power, or peace through strength. You know, for him to give up that would, you know, weaken his hand in his country, I think is what his mental mindset is on that. When we talked about denuclearization, they're talking about the whole peninsula, you know, North Korea getting rid of theirs, South Korea, what North Korea is worried about is our presence there with our nuclear capability. And the other thing you have to worry about is if you get unification, what does that mean to the Kim Jong-un regime? Does he lose power? Does he become a democratic nation over time? And the assurances that we have to make is to make sure that he feels comfortable in those decisions. And what I would envision is kind of a reunification of like Vietnam. They stayed a communist country, but yet they're one of our strongest trading partners today. And there has to be that trade-off that you can have a democratic South Korea that is doing robust trade with North Korea, and then work on those other things, you know, the human rights conditions, you know, the honoring of borders and security and things like that, and allow him to come into the 21st century to feel confident that he doesn't need nuclear weapons. If we look back at World War II, Germany and Japan are some of our strongest trading partners and allies today. If you look at the Vietnam War, I think Vietnam is our 16th largest trading partner today. None of those countries have nuclear weapons. We don't need nuclear weapons. Let's focus on trade, because when you have those wars, what happens is a lot of people die, a lot of money is spent, and then you go back to trade. So let's just bypass the war part. Let's just work on normalizing those relationships with the assurance, as Congressman Burton brought up, of Reagan. We have to go into a trust but verify. And President Trump, I think, did right by reaching out to Kim Jong-un. We have to have, especially in the Asian cultures, and this is what we found in business, we do business with people we know, we like, and we trust. Well, President Trump and Kim Jong-un got to know each other. They got to a point where I think they like each other with their dialogue back and forth. But I think we're at that point, do we trust? And if it does go to a Biden administration, he has to build on that trust. And I think if we do that, we're in the right direction. Thanks.
Thank you. Congressman Doolittle, I'm going to add something to that too. Why are the concentration camps never brought up on dealing with North Korea? That's from Mark Anderson.
I've always wondered that myself. I've always wondered why the whole free world has sat by and turned a blind eye to that over these 70 years. Conditions in those camps that would rival any of the worst things we've ever heard about life under Hitler, Stalin, or Mao. And yet it's as if it's no big deal. I think Congressman Yoho explained things very well. It is, you know, going back to the unification of North and South Korea, when you really think about that, I just can't imagine that the South Koreans would be willing to accept a communist government, albeit maybe one without the concentration camps. But I mean, concentration camps and the authoritarianism that represents are inherent in communism. That's why the reality of a reunification when we're gonna, how we're gonna deal with that communist government in North Korea. It's not an easy thing. Denuclearization could only happen, in my opinion, with a lot of pressure from China, which so far we haven't seen. I understand that it ultimately might make sense for them as well not to have, an unstable character in charge of nuclear weapons in North Korea. But I think we all understand that that's his only ace in the hole, really, right? He's got him in violation of international law, which obviously counted for next to nothing. And so he's got him. And, what is he, the third generation of dictators in North Korea? And this is why it's still a tar baby. And, I commend President Trump for developing the personal relationship with him. As Congressman Yoho said, that's a good thing. And it is a good thing. We need to build upon it, at least for now, building upon it that he's not firing any more missiles. Although, as my friend Guy Taylor observed, there have been some shorter range missile firings for sure. And he likes to stay on the world stage and stay important. I think, though, that it would further everything if the world could give more attention. It would further ultimate progress if the world could become as aware of the terrible atrocities that are ongoing in North Korea and that have gone on, as they are aware of those historical examples that I referred to earlier. I think it would be a real step backward, though, if we just, reassemble the six-party talks, and that's all we do is talk. And by the way, we'll build them a nuclear power plant so they have electricity, or, some other thing that shows more goodwill from the West. The West has bent over backwards. At this point, trust but verify can only be
Very
the
good.
responsible course forward, in my opinion. But I think this is one of the most difficult issues in the world. That's why it's never been resolved. And it would only take focus and unity amongst the allies and projected strength going forward. And we're entering an era, it depends on who our next president is here, but I would have less confidence if it's President Biden, let's put it that way.
Thank you, John. Congressman Burton, question from Bill Seelig. How do you think the China's Finlandization of North Korea, that strategy has been working? And how would you deal with China because they're really holding North Korea up? How do you suggest to deal with that? And Ted Yoho, we've got a question here also from John Kennedy. How will Mr. Biden deal with China if he becomes president in the next 4 years? So Congressman Burton, the Finlandization of North Korea by China, how will you deal with, how do you recommend we deal with China?
Well, I think the way that President Trump has dealt with China has been the proper approach. Obviously, if Biden becomes president, then he'll probably have a little different approach. But it's my view that we need to deal with China on a verifying approach. Make sure if there's any agreement that's made, or if there's anything that's going on in that part of the world, and we're involved, we need to make absolutely sure that we're going to hold China's feet to the fire when they make any kind of a decision, that it's something that the entire region is going to benefit from. And if China tries to do something like Congressman Yoho was talking about earlier about the South China Sea, and they try to take over control of that, we need to let them know that the United States and the free world will not tolerate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Ted, how would you recommend Mr. Biden, if he becomes president, deal with China?
I appreciate Mr. Kennedy asking the question. That's yet to be seen. I mean, we can't really project or really look into the crystal ball. I wish we could, but we can look at past actions. And if we look at what the Obama-Biden administration did, we saw not a lot of action with China, not a lot of forceful talk, you know, and I can't blame the Obama administration or the Bush or the Clintons before that with the trade imbalance that we had with China or the intellectual property theft, because this is something that's happened over 40, 50 years since we started normalizing. And of course, the Clinton administration brought them to the WTO. This has been unchecked. And I am thankful that President Trump, whether you like his tactics or not, I think that he was the first one that says, wait a minute, we have got to readjust this. Will President Biden, if you know, the Biden administration, are they going to be that tough? And if not, I think what you're going to see, knowing what China has done, they are going to go ahead and they're going to push their influence further and further in the South China Sea, South America, Central America. And this is something that has to be held in check. If we do not do this, you're going to see an empowered China, both economically and militarily. And then these other countries that just this, the new RCEP deal that they just signed, you're going to have these trading partners that are going to become that much more dependent on China, who is offering an alternative to Western democracies. And it's their form of Chinese socialism with Chinese characteristics. And I don't care what you call it, it's communism. And so this is really what we're up to in this world today. And this is why if President Biden does get in there, I implore him to stand strong on there, but also build a coalition of nations around the world, because this is not just a threat to the United States. This is a threat to the status quo or the peace that we've had since World War II. And we've got to come together and build that coalition.
Thank you.
Can I just throw in, I'd like to see one thing we ought to be doing with China, and we've finally, I think, approved the sale of those jets to Taiwan. I'd like to do a lot more for Taiwan. That'll help.
Can I interject here?
China.
Dan, or Mike, Dr. Jenkins?
Yeah, go ahead, Ted.
We just introduced the Taiwan Invasion Prevention Act about a month ago that draws a red line that if negotiations with Taiwan is not done peacefully and China invades, it automatically authorizes an AUMF. And I know that's a very scary thing to do, but I think that message needs to be put out there, and it authorizes it for 5 years, so it will go beyond the next administration. Because if we fail to act now and have that down, that kind of a marker down, it's like buying fire insurance after your house is on fire. And I think our bill also brings in other nations and implores them to do the same thing, to let China know you need to act responsibly in the world community, and we're asking you to do this. And Dr. Walsh, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Doolittle and Congressman Yoho. I'd like to ask now, we have about 10 more minutes. We'd like to ask each one of you to give a very brief final remark, starting with Mr. Guy Taylor.
Hi, yeah, I can't emphasize enough how important an administration's bandwidth for this issue is. I feel that the Trump administration did amazing things on North Korea. It's unprecedented that Donald Trump was able to create a personal relationship with Kim Jong-un. Unbelievable. The reason it happened in the optics of the Hanoi summit happening in Vietnam, think about whose idea was that. Roll it back a year and a half before that summit and recognize the publication and the publicity around the creation of a special new CIA mission center focused on North Korea. The Trump administration, Mike Pompeo, they came in and they focused foreign policy bandwidth on this issue. Donald Trump has even said that Barack Obama told him on his way out of the White House, the one issue that's more important from a security standpoint than any other is North Korea. He spoke about it in the debates. He said it really struck him. The administration used bandwidth. If you think for a second that the American foreign policy community cannot outthink the North Koreans, cannot outsmart the Chinese and solve this problem, then you're wrong. If we focus, if the Biden camp comes in and actually focuses hard on this and harnesses the resources of the US military, the intelligence community, the civil society, we'll solve the problem.
Very good. Congressman Yoho?
Well, again, I want to thank you for putting this together along with
Thank
UPF International and Washington Times. Just looking forward, what we need to do, it goes back to the mantra of what America stands for. You know, from what Ronald Reagan said, the shining city on the hill, that beacon of light, that beacon of liberty and freedom. You know, traveling around the world and having the opportunity to be the chairman of the Asia Pacific subcommittee, we had the Indonesian ambassador. We had a very lengthy talk, and he drove something home to me that I hadn't really looked at and thought of. He said that when his founders of their country decided to pick a form of government, they could have chosen any in the world, the UK, Germany, whatever, but they chose the American form of government, and they'd never been here, but they read about our founders, and they understood the power of we the people and empowering people. That to me changed my perspective, because America is bigger than a president. It's bigger than a Democratic or Republican Party. It's those ideals that people want around the world that are enshrined in our Constitution. That's what we have that we offer the rest of the world. That's why so many people flock here. It's our responsibility to share that with the world in the name of peace, and yes, peace through strength, and get people, other nations, to join that, to put the pressure on those countries that are trying to erode that, i.e. China, Iran, Russia. And I don't want to tell them how to live, just to put enough pressure so that they follow the world norms to allow other countries to enjoy the peace that we've been blessed with. That's what America is. That's what any administration that comes in, I hope they carry that mantle and spread that around the world, and that we fight literally in the sense of making that happen, not in a conflict, but fight internally to make sure that we carry that torch out around the world. Thanks.
Congressman Doolittle, final comment.
Well, many have observed it, and I will endorse it. I'm always impressed by the resources the Universal Peace Federation is able to marshal for these worldwide conferences. Of course, since COVID-19, it's been handled differently, but it is an amazing focus that's brought to bear on the issue of peace throughout the world. And even these webinars, I mean, the amazing role the Washington Times plays in keeping freedom alive and bringing the truth out in a world that's so full of falsehoods spread in various ways. Freedom is God's gift to men and women in the world, but there's a great deal of evil in the world, and let's face it, we're fighting the forces of evil, and it's our job to wage the battle as best we can, to bring to bear our knowledge, our strength, our talents, to try and make the world a better place. The questioner who asked me about the concentration camps in Korea, and you know, that needs to be exposed. The horrific conditions imposed by the Chinese on the Uyghurs, for example, or on including forced organ harvests, what they do in Tibet. I mean, these things, yes. And they're unfortunately, the scriptures say the love of money is the root of all evil. And as we all know, there are many corporations throughout the world with deep ties into China. And so it creates a disincentive for exposing these things, because it might cost the corporations money. And I think that kind of thing needs to be resisted. And we as a country ought to take the lead and expose these tremendous fundamental abuses of human rights that are going on in China and in North Korea. And I frankly think it would do a lot to bring about the progress that we seek. I mean, we're supposed to bring the truth to light, not to cover it up. So individual action counts for a lot. And Dr. Moon and the organizations that she heads, such as the Universal Peace Federation, and the various entities associated with that, the Washington Times. These are all vital components, and they're all exemplary of what individual action can represent, because it's not the government. It's basically one individual and the persuasive powers and resources that that person commands that's been able to do this. And all of us can be part of it and can do it. And God will bless our efforts. So thank you for allowing me to participate today.
Thank you for your leadership as chairman of North America for IAPP, John. Thank you. I'd like to ask Mr. McDivitt, then Dr. Walsh, and we'll end with Congressman Burton. If you could all unmute and just 1 minute reflection.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Jenkins, and good to see all my good friends.
Welcome, the chairman of the Washington Times, by the way. We're very fortunate to have him just with us. Thank you.
Well, I think you all hit it out of the park today. I can't wait to see the next round of this discussion from the IAPP standpoint. A little later today, we're going to do a similar discussion from the business standpoint, the International Association for Peace and Economic Development. That is, what's the economic future of the Korean Peninsula? And tomorrow, it'll be looking at it from a media perspective. All of that's part of these different associations of UPF. I think Guy Taylor summed it up with the key word of focus. Make this a priority. And I love the fact that Dr. Moon has kind of put a time horizon over the next 2 years. So no matter who's in the White House, we've got great work to do and great potential. And I think Dr. Walsh and all the members of IAPP are doing a great job. Let's keep this moving. Congratulations, an exceptional panel.
Thank
you so much.
Dr. Walsh, if you could unmute, and chairman of UPF International.
Yeah, just very quickly to echo what Mr. McDivitt said. Excellent program, great group of panelists, and I hope we can make this a regular project. Over the next 2 years, I see us continuing this discussion through a variety of sectors, not only the parliamentarians, but as Tom McDivitt said, through economic, even interfaith and media, academics and experts. So very excited, great start, great program. Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Thank you, Congressman Dan Burton, for making this happen.
Thank you, Dr. Walsh. And our co-chairman of IAPP International, Congressman Dan Burton.
Thanks, Mike. I'd like to end up by saying that whoever the next president is, and I think Trump already realizes this, but assuming it's Biden, President Biden, the one thing that totalitarian governments don't respect is weakness. They respect strength. If you just want to get along with them, they'll push you all over the world. So if I were talking to anybody in the next administration, whoever it may be, I would say, remember, bullies only understand one thing in this world, and that is strength. If you're strong with them, you're understanding and you talk with them, but if you're strong with them, they'll respect you and they'll work with you. If you aren't strong, they'll push you all over the place. And this is something we cannot tolerate in a world like we have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Burton. We're going to show a 1 minute invitation video to the Rally of Hope this Saturday at 8 p.m. We're having a global Rally of Hope with UPF. Heads of state, Congressman Charles Rangel, Ambassador Christopher Hill, Ambassador from the U.S. to Korea, and many, many important leaders who have been speaking on this program, like Congressman Burton. It's a 1 minute sizzle reel. It should take us right to the end of our time.
Dr. Moon has devoted ceaseless efforts to bring together stakeholders from all realms of society.
What Mother Moon has done in carrying on the work of her husband in building a worldwide movement committed to the concept that we can find ways to work together is a key to a successful future.
It's due to Dr. Moon's vision and inspiration that a global dialogue of this scale and of this quality is occurring at a time such as this.
Thank you, everybody. We're right on time. Have a wonderful week. Let's fight for peace and freedom globally. Thank you.